turn again. I already mentioned that these are called the 5 daily recollections. And from that, you can already assume that they're important. Important for everyday contemplation. And while you're here in the course, you have lots of time to do that. You can do it in your individual meditation time. You don't have to sit here in order to do it. You can sit anywhere to contemplate. You can stand under a tree and contemplate. Just so you keep your mind on the subject. And if there is a resistance in the mind to think of one's own death, decay or disease, you can be assured that it is even more important that one does it. That resistance shows that one really doesn't want anything to do with it. And yet, these are laws of nature. And we have this very strange habit, human beings have that strange habit, of trying to go beyond or against the laws of nature. And nothing good comes from it. We know very well what happens when we do that in nature around us. So nothing good comes of it, going against the laws of nature in one's mind, against that which is absolutely certain. Anybody who's ever been alive and is not alive now is dead. There are no two ways about it. And we're all on our way to the cemetery. There's no other passage. But in that passage, we have many opportunities. And the very first opportunity we have is the acceptance of the fact that we have no idea how long we're going to be here. It's very rare that a person knows. And we have no idea how long our loved ones will be here. Now, fortunately, in the West, we started about 20 years ago actually using death as a topic. Until then, it was taboo. The Buddha talked about it 2,500 years ago and said, daily. Saint Benedict did it in the Middle Ages. But we didn't want to talk about it. We didn't want to know about it. It was something that one would even keep a secret from the members of the family. And of course, trying to keep it a secret from the one who was dying. But it's quite certain that when one is dying, one knows. Whether anybody tells one or not is totally immaterial. As a certain change, and that change is known. So one doesn't have to tell anybody really. But it's absurd to try to keep it a secret. And it's equally absurd to keep it a secret from oneself while one is alive. Why keep anything a secret which is absolutely certain, which cannot be escaped, and which is no threat and no tragedy? It's just the passage of a living being. All living beings die. And that includes nature around us. I already mentioned oceans and stars and everything that we can think of, mountains even. It's a matter of time. One thing we can do at this point in time, to make that passage easier for us, is not to do anything that we would regret later. To be very careful. Because if one does something on the spur of the moment, impulsively, instinctively, one may very well regret it. And one may still regret it on one's deathbed. And then dying is difficult. Regrets are resistances, they're negativities. So that's one thing we can do, which means making good karma. Having the intention. The Buddha said, karma, O monks, I declare, is intention. Having the intention and trying to live by the intention. And possibly improve the intention. And improve what one is doing. So that there is a certain feeling of contentment about one's passage through life. Contentment is absolutely essential for meditation, and it also produces self-assurance. Without self-assurance, life is difficult, spiritual path is difficult. Everything is difficult. So that's one thing we can look at, the intention. Now, how do we make good karma? How do we do nothing that we would ever regret? Making good karma has many possibilities, and on one level it is being helpful, being loving, giving oneself, not wanting to take, but giving. And if we do that, we will also see that there is contentment coming from that. We all have love to give. We can always learn to be helpful and to think of others. That doesn't mean that we think of others to the exclusion of caring and looking after ourselves. As you know, we start the loving kindness meditation with having love for ourselves. What we don't feel for ourselves, we don't feel for anybody. No matter what we think we feel. We very often think we feel something. The more acceptance and lovingness is extended towards oneself, which does not mean indulgence, which is a total opposite to that, the easier it is to love others. So that's one thing that we can determine to do. And if we have that kind of determination as a thread running through our lives, we have very often no regrets whatsoever. However, should we come to later years in life and feel we have missed this, that or the other, then there is total resistance to the fact that death is imminent. Obviously we think that death is imminent when people are old or older, but that's also not true. Death is always imminent. We have no idea what's happening. It's very good that we can't look into the future. We'd probably be even more fearful than we are already. But because we don't know, doesn't mean that we shouldn't be prepared. We should prepare while we're alive. To start preparing on our deathbed is much too late. First of all, our physical capacities are no longer the same, and therefore we are reacting most likely with the mind to the physical difficulties and can therefore not do a clear-cut practice. Now, when we're still all right, or as all right as we'll ever be physically, that's the time. That's the time to come to terms with one's own death. To know it for what it is, the natural outcome of being alive. and nothing to be afraid of. There are a number of books that are very interesting to read, and they depict stories, are very, some of them, 2 of them I've read, they have the stories of people who had near-death experience in hospital and were brought to life again with some modern technique. And they tell about their experience. And it can be taken for granted that they actually had that experience. Because what it entails is also that after they came back to life, first they were angry at the doctor. That was the first thing, that he brought them back to life, because they were having a wonderful time actually. And then when they made up their mind it was all right to be back there, they also changed their lifestyle. And they became far more concerned with the well-being of others. And the experiences that are in those books and written by a doctor, the one I remember most vividly is by Dr. Moody, are most certainly personal experiences. They are very much akin to our culture and society, because what people see, not with the physical eye, but what they see as inner visions, is very much dependent upon the culture and society that we come from. That's why I'll just briefly mention the Tibetan Book of the Dead has as visions those things which belong to the Tibetan culture and society. People are used to those wrathful deities that they can see as visions. I've never seen a wrathful deity. I don't know what a wrathful deity is actually all about. So we come from cultures which have a different setup, and therefore our visions that we have are also different. And those stories or those personal experiences show quite clearly that the passage from life to death is gentle, and it is elevating, and it is non-threatening, and it is, when you accept it, there's no fight. It is something that one could even compare to a very, very concentrated meditative state in the formless absorptions. They didn't say that. I'm saying that. But from what was written, one could actually make that kind of conclusion. So there is absolutely nothing to be afraid of. What we are afraid of is, unfortunately, the strongest craving we have. As I told you, the Buddha made this enlightenment statement of the Four Noble Truths. The first noble truth, that there is dukkha in all existence. Second noble truth, that dukkha has only one cause, and that's craving. And that there are three kinds of cravings. And they are the craving to be, the craving not to be, and the craving for sensual gratification. The strongest is the craving to be. Sometimes when everything goes wrong and one is very depressed, then the craving not to be comes into play, but it's nothing but the other side of the same coin. It's just exactly the same thing as the craving to be. Now this is our strongest, and it produces dukkha. Why does it produce dukkha? Because we know very well that this craving can never be realized. one of these days we're not going to be. So we're actually craving something which is totally impossible. And we make ourselves rather unhappy with craving something which we can never accomplish. Wouldn't it stand to reason to let go of that craving? Yes, it would, naturally. But it's not as easily done as said. Because in order to do it, one has to see oneself in a different light. It's not enough to see oneself as a guest performer. That's a beginning. It's not enough to realize that our thoughts and feelings are constantly changing and that there's no security in them. It's a good start. It's not enough to realize in meditation that our thoughts are very often unbelievable and we therefore don't really have to follow them. It's a good beginning. It sort of shakes the foundation of the ego belief a little. But in order to totally get rid of the craving to be, one has to get rid of the illusion who we are. And this is the pathway where everything leads to get rid of this illusion. When we get rid of that illusion, there are any number of misconceptions about what happens after one gets rid of that illusion. One of the misconceptions is one isn't going to do anything. One's totally inactive. Why one thinks that way is not quite clear, because getting rid of an illusion doesn't mean the same as inactivity. The other misconception is that should we get rid of the illusion of self, that we're not going to enjoy anything. It's just the other way around. One enjoys everything far more. The other illusion is that when one gets rid of this self-belief, that one is then more like a vegetable than a person. Well, it's a total misconception. None of that is true. These are all myths that the mind makes up. And why does it make it up? Because the ego says, I don't want to go away. I've lived here many lifetimes. I'm going to stay here. And so the ego makes this very strong stand. And as it makes a strong stand, the mind goes along with it and says, sure, that's quite right. We must be very bad to get rid of that illusion. Even though one has an underlying doubt, because the Buddha talked about it all the time. And not only the Buddha, all Christian mystics talked about it. All Sufi mystics talked about it, wrote about it, showed some way of using one's mind to get rid of this illusion. So we have a niggling doubt in the back of our minds that maybe there's something to it, but the ego is much stronger. So if we realize that this craving to be is detrimental to our happiness, it's a first step in letting go of it. That doesn't mean by any means that if we let go of it a bit, that we have to change our lifestyle or stop doing what we're doing. It means we're doing it differently. It looks outwardly exactly the same. Nobody gets a halo. They're not available. So everything looks the same outwardly. But inwardly, there is more of this doing for doing's sake, but not for result's sake. And that's one loss of anxiety. And also, it's a loss of the feeling of being overstressed, because it's only the result thinking which produces stress, it's not the doing. So then, having had at least that much of a shaking of the foundation of this craving that we have, we can look further. And as we look further, obviously, we will have a look at our own death. And if the mind says, it's quite all right for me to die, I don't have to look at that, you can be sure that you have to look again. Human nature is opposed to death because we have, as our strongest craving, the craving to be. And not only that, in our culture, many people have been imbued with the fear of death because they haven't behaved just the way they should. So things are going to go wrong for them. That's also a very strong unpleasantness. It's not only that they're afraid to die because human beings are afraid to die. No, it's because we've been taught that too. So we have that in addition. Not in every culture. Bavaria is strong in that. It's a very strong point. But none of that has any basis, in fact. If we now live at this time without being afraid to die, we can live in liberty. One thing that is lost immediately is trying to be appreciated, because that's another ego support, and it's very unpleasant. Sometimes some people have more luck with it than others, they get more appreciated, but most of the time we need to be outwardly directed in order to be appreciated. That doesn't mean that we start being unpleasant to other people, on the contrary, but what we can do is we can be totally truthful to ourselves and others. We don't have to take their responses into consideration. If they respond in the same way that we try to contact them, fine. If not, we can try again. So if we have no fear of death, we also have no fear of not being appreciated. If we have no fear of death, we have no fear for our loved ones. That's a big thing, because that's the strongest clinging. Clinging is to the detriment of becoming free. And freedom is what the Buddha taught. Mental, emotional freedom. There are many words that we can make about it, but that's its essential nature. Nibbana means literally translated non-burning, but it's freedom. Freedom from fear. It doesn't matter what age one has at this time. Anybody can die at any age. If one is older, naturally, it's even more important. The transition from this life to death entails, of course, as long as one isn't enlightened, rebirth. But we have to remember that the person that we know now, with this name, these looks, these abilities, these possessions, is never going to be reborn again. Never. That's it. It's a one-time guest performance. And that's why we need to practice now and not later. The only thing that gets reborn are karmic resultants. That's all. And we can't even say that they're reborn. It's difficult to use the proper words. We can only say that karmic resultants connect. That's it. And so we appear here, when we get born, with karmic resultants. But that doesn't mean that we're stuck to them. That people do believe that. They believe, oh yes, it's my karma, but I can't do anything about it. That's a total misconception. That would be akin to fate. And the Buddha said, no, karma is not fate. We have free choice to a certain extent in every moment. The Buddha voiced it like this. He said there are 4 kinds of people. One lot gets born in the dark and goes to the dark. Another kind gets born in the dark and goes to the light. Another kind gets born in the light and goes to the dark. Another kind gets born in the light and goes to the light. Light and dark depicting good and bad circumstances. So we have opportunities, which is our new karma making. We do bring with us the tendencies, and particularly the tendency which is the craving to be, because otherwise we wouldn't get born. That's the reason for being born, the craving to be. And if we want to experience this matter of rebirth, which people so often say, oh well, I don't believe that. Buddha just said that. Or how can I prove it? It's I've got to be dead first and then I don't know anything. All these understandable objections. We use one day at a time. We get reborn in the morning. The day is young and we are quite strong after our rest. We bring with us the karmic resultants of yesterday. There's no doubt about that. If we had a big fight the day before, that will still linger in the mind. If we had a lot of loving relationships the day before, that will affect the mind. And then, as the day goes on, we make good karma or bad karma. And this karma making starts in the mind. Our thoughts. Their thoughts are the instigators of whatever happens. And that's why we need to watch our thoughts most carefully. That's what we learn in meditation, to label. That's what we do in everyday life, we label. We've got to know what we're thinking. And if the thought process is unwholesome, we are making bad karma. If it's wholesome, we're making good karma. And anyone can teach him or herself to make good karma. Obviously, there are situations where we are impulsively overrun by resistances and rejections, and if they come to the point where another person is affected, we should as quickly as possible apologize. Simply for the relief of regret within oneself. If there's any person that we have a long-standing disagreement with or rejection for, we should hasten to remedy that as quickly as possible. First of all, we don't know when that person will die. Secondly, we don't know when we will die. And thirdly, the quicker we remedy the negativity, the less of a rut will it produce in our minds. The longer we keep it, the deeper it will go into the mind. The mind will be permeated by it. It's a very unfortunate thing that people don't realize that if they dislike anyone, dislike is in the mind, and it affects the mind and the heart. It can't be otherwise. We cannot make compartments in our mind and our heart. There are the compartments for the people we like, and here are some compartments for the people we don't like, and we can keep them all separate. It just can't be done. It doesn't work that way. It doesn't have any drawers, the mind, where we can do this. So the whole thing goes on in heart and mind. So the quicker we get rid of it, the better. And particularly if we realize that a person that we have had great difficulty with and have not ironed that out in this life will definitely reappear for that next person that is getting reborn, and they're going to be exactly the same difficulties. Both will have different names, they'll look different, they'll live somewhere different, but they're going to have exactly the same difficulties, because those are the karmic resultants. Karma is cause and effect. As you sow, you will reap. It's to be found in all spiritual disciplines. You can't put carrot seeds in the ground and expect tomatoes. There's just no way you can do that. Nobody does. But with karma, people do. They think they can think anything, and nobody will know about it, so everything will be all right. It's a total fallacy. First of all, our thoughts are visible and tangible, and they affect us ourselves. And that's why with our karma, if we have the intention, our watching of the thought and the substituting the unwholesome with the wholesome is the most important first step. Karma making goes on as long as we have this feeling that there's somebody within us who's called me. Now, if you wake up in the morning and you get out of bed, you don't have to tell yourself who you are. You know it's you. I mean, nobody has to go around saying to himself, my name is, and I am such and such. It's totally unnecessary. We know exactly who we are when we get out of bed. So we have the inner feeling of self. As long as that inner feeling of self exists, so long we make karma. There's somebody there that's doing these things. I am meditating, or I am not meditating. And that is a way which is quite all right, and which is on the level of the worldly endeavor, where we can make the connection by making good karma to transcendence. Then good karma is practically always connected to reducing egocentricity. Practically always connected to that. And the more we reduce egocentricity, the more we shake that illusion. Some people do it naturally. They've brought that tendency with them. Some people learn it and understand that this is important. And some people keep forgetting about it. Anybody the way they can. But that is practically always connected with making good karma. Now, as the day goes on, we're watching our thoughts, and we're trying not to make any bad karma with our thoughts, or obviously not with the speech and with the action either. Then get more tired, get older, the day gets older, and the day is finished, and we go to bed and die a small death. We don't know where we are. Next morning, we're there again, and we bring with us what we have done in the past. There you have a personal experience of day-to-day rebirth. In essence, we are reborn every second. And as I said, get out old photo albums and stand in front of the mirror, and you will know what is meant by that we get reborn every second. Now, if you take that to heart, getting reborn every second and living that second, if that actually sinks in as a personal experience, then there can be no fear of death. Because the next second from life into death is nothing but the dissolution or the separation of mind from body, and eventually the dissolution of the body. That's all it is. There is a next moment. The next moment is only not there for a fully enlightened one, but otherwise there is the next moment. So fear of death is so widespread and so ingrained because we think this is it, just being here. But if you think for a moment, if that was all there was, is it really worth it? It's beset with difficulties, isn't it? There's always something. Being afraid of this or that, wanting something new, getting here or there, having unease, body or mind. Is it really worth it? So the mind goes to the future. It's going to be better in the future. Really? If one has more past, one knows that too isn't true. But if we let go of this idea that there's something behind the next second, but be in it, then there's nothing to fear. We flow with that stream that starts at birth and goes on after death. We flow with it. If we don't live in this very moment, it's like damming the stream. We put boulders in it because we don't want it to flow like that. And what do we get when we make a dam? We get turbulence. And that's what people have. They have inner turbulence because things are not totally satisfactory if they really begin to look. So living our life at least in one day, from morning to night, is already a big help in not being afraid of what comes after. Why should we worry about what comes after? There's nothing after. It's always now. And it is just as gentle a transition as we go to bed at night and wake up in the morning. It's the same transition. It's being asleep and being awake is different. So that's the same thing. And if we can learn through meditation to actually have the attention one-pointedly on this one moment, we will experience no fear. And no fear is liberating. There's nothing that can be more liberating. Now people have fear for the lives of their loved ones, they have fear of their old age, fear of diseases, fear of death naturally. They have a fear of political upheavals, of the atomic bomb, of any number of things. Can't think of all of them, but I'm sure you can, help to think of all of them. So, what for? This is the moment, and it's a gentle stream which keeps on flowing. And as long as we flow with it, and do not try to turn the tide, and do not try to stem that flow, but be totally contented to be in it, as long as we do that, then there's nothing at all to fear. People of all ages have lived and died. All you have to do is look at a history book. And they have had the same fears and worries and upsets that we have. But it's not necessary. There have always been some that have seen it differently. And as they see it differently, they can live differently inside of themselves, not outside, inside. What they do outside is very often according to circumstance. Whatever their circumstances are, that's what happens outside. But within that acceptance of the gentle flow which keeps going, of course, gentles heart and mind. And as it becomes gentler, it can meditate better. And as we can meditate better, we have a much stronger transition from the worldly to the supermundane or the transcendental. The transcendental, which is then the real experience and realization that what we see as separate identities, what we see as self, what we see as being or having boundaries, like each body having a boundary, being finished here, and then another body, and another, that it's all optical illusion. It's not the way it really is. Transcending that, what is an optical illusion, and what is, of course, a mind state, cannot be done without meditation, but we must remember that the meditation is only the bridge between the two. No fear is one of the helpmates, support systems, or let me say, less fear. Less fear is already a necessary ingredient in order to meditate. Because if there's a great deal of fearfulness, and it's always the same, fear of annihilation, then the mind is not willing to let go of the thinking and to fall into the states of inner being where the ego or the me has much less of a support system, where we experience the levels of consciousness on a totally different, in a different area. So less fear is essential to concentrate, to make meditation possible. The more fear, the less meditation. When we come to the point where the concentration is actually beginning, when we experience fear at that moment, and I've already said that and I'll repeat it, investigate. What am I possibly afraid of? What can happen? And as you investigate truly, you will see nothing can happen. Nothing at all. What's the worst thing people can be afraid of? Death. So, it will happen anyway, whether we're afraid of it or not. So why not let go of fear? It all makes sense, but it's got to be done. And that's why we use the contemplation, in order to get in there and see it for what it is within. I like to suggest once more that every day you use some time for contemplation. Contemplation is for insight. The meditation which we practice at this particular time is for calm and tranquility. We need both. And the essence of the teaching is on those three levels: the purification, the meditation, and wisdom insight. Those are the three levels of the teaching. And they all, of course, interact. They can't do anything else. I need to tell you some practical matters.